Hi, I'm Maya. 3 years ago, my sister took scissors to my favorite dress the night before my husband's company gala, making it 3 sizes smaller with a note that read, "Motivation." What she didn't know was that I'd been secretly documenting her lies for months, or that my husband's billion-dollar diet empire was built on stolen research. Now she's the face of his brand, and I'm the whistleblower who brought them both down. The woman they called too big to succeed just cost them everything they thought they owned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The humidity in Miami always made my hair curl in ways that reminded me of childhood summers, back when Olivia and I would spend hours braiding each other's hair on our grandmother's porch. That was before she learned that cruelty could be currency, before I discovered that family could be the cruelest strangers of all. I was running late to David's office, my heels clicking against the marble floors of the Meridian Wellness headquarters, the building that housed his revolutionary diet supplement empire. The receptionist, a young woman whose smile seemed permanently fixed in place, waved me through without the usual visitor's badge routine. Being the CEO's wife had its privileges, though lately those privileges felt more like gilded chains. David's corner office overlooked Biscayne Bay, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the endless blue that always made me feel small. He was on a call when I entered, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when discussing quarterly projections. Numbers. Always numbers. Revenue streams and market penetration rates and demographic breakdowns that reduced human beings to data points on a spreadsheet. I'd learned to tune it out years ago, the same way I'd learned to ignore the way his eyes would drift to my waistline during our conversations, calculating something I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. He finished the call and looked up, his expression shifting to that practiced warmth he reserved for me in professional settings. Maya. Perfect timing. I wanted to discuss the gala tomorrow night, the annual Meridian Wellness Innovation Awards, where David would accept recognition for his company's contributions to what he called transformative health solutions. It was the kind of event where everyone dressed to impress and spoke in carefully crafted soundbites about changing lives and empowering individuals. The irony wasn't lost on me that I always felt most powerless at these gatherings. The dress hanging in my closet at home was a deep emerald silk, chosen specifically for how it made me feel confident without being ostentatious. I'd found it at a boutique in Coral Gables, and the saleswoman had said it brought out the gold flecks in my brown eyes. David had approved of it with a nod when I'd shown him, though his approval always came with subtle suggestions about shapewear or strategic accessorizing. These suggestions were never demands, never cruel enough to call controlling, just gentle guidance toward becoming the version of myself he preferred. We talked briefly about the guest list, the media coverage, the importance of presenting a united front as Meridian prepared to launch its newest product line. David had been working on this launch for 18 months, something he called metabolic revolution technology that promised to rewrite the rules of weight management. The clinical trials had been promising, he'd told me, though I'd noticed he was vague about specifics whenever I asked questions. My background in biochemistry made me curious about the science, but David preferred to keep business and personal life separate. At least, that's what he told me. After leaving his office, I stopped by my own small workspace on the 3rd floor. Officially, I was a consultant for Meridian's research and development team, though my role had become increasingly ceremonial over the past year. My doctorate in nutritional biochemistry had been attractive to David when we'd met at a conference in Boston 5 years earlier. He'd been impressed by my presentation on metabolic pathway optimization, impressed enough to offer me both a position at his company and, 6 months later, a marriage proposal that came with a 2-carat diamond and a 5-year plan for expanding into international markets. My computer screen showed 17 unread emails, most of them routine interdepartmental communications. But one subject line made me pause. Urgent data inconsistency review needed from Dr. Rebecca Chen, one of the few researchers at Meridian whose integrity I'd never questioned. I opened the email and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Rebecca had been reviewing the metabolic revolution trial data and found what she diplomatically called statistical anomalies that required immediate attention. She'd requested a meeting, but not at the office. Her email suggested we meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. I agreed to meet her the following morning, though something about the secrecy made me uneasy. Rebecca wasn't prone to dramatics or conspiracy theories. If she was concerned enough to meet off-site, there was a legitimate reason. I forwarded the email to my personal account and deleted it from my work inbox, though I couldn't articulate why that felt necessary. The drive home took 40 minutes through Miami traffic that moved like sluggish water. Our house in Pinecrest was David's choice, a sprawling contemporary structure with clean lines and a pool that reflected the sky like a mirror. It was beautiful in the way that magazine spreads were beautiful, carefully curated, and somehow impersonal, despite being filled with our belongings. I tried to add warmth with plants and books and photographs, but David preferred minimalism. Clean lines promote clear thinking, he'd say, and gradually my personal touches had migrated to the guest bedrooms and my study. Olivia's car was in the driveway when I arrived, a white BMW that David had helped her lease when she'd moved to Miami 6 months earlier. She'd claimed she needed a fresh start after a bad breakup in Atlanta, and David had been surprisingly generous in helping her get established. He'd found her an apartment in South Beach, introduced her to potential employers in his network, even hired her as a part-time social media consultant for Meridian. Olivia had always been charming, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately identify the most influential person there. David appreciated that quality in people. I found her in the kitchen, sitting at the island with her laptop open and papers scattered around her. She looked up when I entered, her smile bright and familiar. "Maya, perfect timing. I was just working on the social media strategy for tomorrow night's gala. David wants maximum engagement across all platforms." She'd always been beautiful in a way that seemed effortless. Blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, blue eyes that sparkled when she laughed. Next to her, I'd always felt substantial rather than striking, intelligent rather than captivating. We talked about the event logistics, while I sorted through the mail. The gala would be held at the Fontainebleau, with over 300 guests, including investors, medical professionals, and media representatives. Olivia had coordinated with the hotel's events team and hired a photographer who specialized in corporate gatherings. She'd thought of details I wouldn't have considered, like ensuring the lighting would be flattering for photos and arranging for a signature cocktail that matched Meridian's brand colors. I was impressed despite myself. Olivia had always been organized when something mattered to her, though historically the things that mattered to her were parties and shopping and attracting attention from wealthy men. Seeing her apply that focus to professional work was unexpected. David had been right to hire her, even if I'd initially been skeptical about mixing family and business. I went upstairs to check on my dress, wanting to confirm everything was ready for the following evening. The closet in our master bedroom was the size of a small room, with custom shelving and lighting that David had insisted upon during the house's renovation. My section took up perhaps a quarter of the space, my clothes arranged by color and season in a system David had suggested for maximum efficiency. His suits dominated the larger portion, organized with military precision. The emerald dress hung where I'd left it, protected by a garment bag. I unzipped the bag and immediately knew something was wrong. The dress was there, but it looked different. Smaller. I pulled it out completely and held it up to the light. Someone had altered it, taking in the seam so dramatically that it was now several sizes too small. The work was expert, nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for, but there was no question that the dress had been deliberately modified. A folded piece of paper fell from the garment bag when I moved the dress. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The handwriting was Olivia's, neat and precise in a way that made the words seem more deliberate than cruel. "Thought you might want some extra motivation for tomorrow night. You'll thank me when you see the photos. XOXO. Liv." I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the ruined dress, trying to process what had happened. Olivia had come into my home, into my private space, and destroyed something that belonged to me. She'd done it with surgical precision, ensuring that I wouldn't discover the alteration until it was too late to find a replacement. The gala was less than 24 hours away, and finding another dress would be nearly impossible, given the short notice and the importance of the event. But beyond the practical problem was the emotional violation. Olivia knew that I struggled with my weight, knew that I'd spent years battling the voices in my head that told me I wasn't thin enough, pretty enough, worthy enough. She'd weaponized that insecurity with the kind of calculated cruelty that took my breath away. The note's cheerful tone made it worse, as if she'd done me a favor by sabotaging my confidence. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly shoved the dress back into the garment bag. David appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie with the automatic gesture of someone ending a long day. "How did the dress shopping go?" he asked, though I realized he must have confused me with Olivia. She'd mentioned earlier that she needed to find something for the gala, and apparently David had assumed I'd gone with her. "The dress is fine," I said, hoping my voice sounded normal. "Everything's ready for tomorrow." He nodded and began changing clothes, chatting about the guest list and the speech he'd prepared for the awards ceremony. I made appropriate responses while my mind raced through possible solutions. I could drive to the mall early in the morning and hope to find something suitable off the rack. I could call the boutique where I'd bought the original dress and see if they had anything similar in stock. I could even skip the gala entirely, claiming sudden illness. But each option felt like admitting defeat, like allowing Olivia to succeed in whatever game she was playing.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
And I was beginning to suspect this was indeed a game, with rules I didn't understand and stakes that went beyond a single dress. David finished changing and headed downstairs to his study, leaving me alone with the evidence of my sister's betrayal. I took out my phone and called the boutique, but they were closed. I tried 2 department stores, but neither had formal wear in my size available for immediate purchase. The online options would require shipping times that wouldn't work for tomorrow's deadline. I was still sitting on the bed when I heard laughter from downstairs, the kind of bright, artificial sound that Olivia made when she was performing for an audience. David's lower voice joined hers, and I realized she was still in the house. They were probably discussing final details for the gala, but something about their easy camaraderie made me feel like an outsider in my own home. I grabbed my laptop and did something I'd never done before. I opened social media and began scrolling through Olivia's recent posts. Her Instagram was a carefully curated collection of Miami lifestyle photos, artfully arranged smoothie bowls and sunset views, and selfies that showcased her work with Meridian. She'd tagged the company in dozens of posts, always with captions about transformation and wellness journeys and finding your best self. But as I scrolled deeper, I noticed patterns that made me uncomfortable. Many of her posts featured before and after photos of women who'd used Meridian products, always with dramatic weight loss results. The testimonials were glowing, the transformations remarkable, but something about them felt manufactured. The lighting was too professional, the poses too practiced, the results too consistent. I opened a new browser window and began searching for some of the women featured in Olivia's posts. It took nearly an hour, but I finally found what I was looking for. Several of the after photos appeared to be stock images, professional headshots that could be purchased from photography websites. The women in the before photos were real, but their stories had been fabricated. Olivia had been creating fake testimonials for Meridian's social media presence. My hands were trembling as I took screenshots of everything I'd found. This wasn't just about a dress anymore. This was about fraud, about a systematic deception that could destroy lives and livelihoods. People were making decisions about their health and spending their money based on lies that my sister had carefully constructed. I heard footsteps on the stairs again and quickly closed the laptop. David appeared in the doorway, this time carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Olivia suggested we have a little celebration," he said, offering me one of the glasses. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day for all of us." I accepted the wine, but didn't drink it. "What exactly are we celebrating?" I asked. He seemed surprised by the question, as if the answer should be obvious. "The launch, Maya. The metabolic revolution. Everything we've been working toward for the past 2 years." But I realized I didn't know what "we" meant anymore. David and I had been married for 4 years, but increasingly I felt like a supporting player in his success story rather than a true partner. My contributions to Meridian had been minimized over time, my research relegated to background consulting, while David took credit for innovations I'd helped develop. And now Olivia had somehow inserted herself into that dynamic, becoming David's collaborator in ways that excluded me entirely. The wine tasted bitter when I finally sipped it, though that might have been my mood rather than the vintage. David talked enthusiastically about tomorrow's event, about the media coverage, and the potential for expanding into new markets. He mentioned that Olivia had arranged for a documentary crew to film portions of the gala, capturing what he called authentic moments of transformation. Authentic moments. The phrase stuck in my throat like a lie I couldn't swallow. Nothing about tomorrow would be authentic. I'd be wearing a dress that didn't fit, promoting products based on fabricated testimonials, supporting a company that had systematically erased my contributions. And my sister would be there documenting it all, probably laughing at the private joke of my humiliation. After David went to bed, I sat in my study with the lights off, staring out at the pool that glowed like a blue jewel in the darkness. The house was quiet, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic on nearby streets. I felt more alone than I had in years, surrounded by luxury but stripped of dignity. I opened my laptop again and began writing. Not an email, not a social media post, but something that felt like a confession or a manifesto. I wrote about the dress, about the fake testimonials, about the gradual erosion of my role at a company I'd helped build. I wrote about feeling invisible in my own life, about watching my sister charm her way into the spaces I'd once occupied. But as I wrote, something shifted inside me. The words weren't just documenting my pain, they were clarifying my purpose. I wasn't just a victim of Olivia's cruelty or David's ambition. I was a scientist with knowledge and evidence, and the training to understand what I was seeing. I had spent years studying metabolic pathways and nutritional biochemistry, years that had prepared me to recognize fraud when I encountered it. The screenshots I'd taken were just the beginning. If Olivia was falsifying testimonials, there were probably other deceptions I hadn't discovered yet. And if David was aware of these practices, or if he was encouraging them, then his entire empire was built on foundations that could crumble under scrutiny. I saved the document I'd been writing and titled it The Real Story. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I created a new email account under a name that wasn't connected to my identity or my marriage. If I was going to investigate my own family, I needed to do it from a position they couldn't compromise or control. The clock on my laptop showed 2:17 a.m. when I finally closed it and headed upstairs. David was asleep, his breathing deep and regular in the way that suggested complete peace of mind. I envied him that certainty, that ability to rest without questioning the foundation of everything he'd built. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around us. Tomorrow's gala would be a performance, but I was no longer sure who the audience was supposed to be. The investors and media representatives would see David's success story, Olivia's creative marketing, and my supportive presence as the dutiful wife. But underneath that polished surface, I was beginning to suspect there were secrets that could change everything. The dress hanging in my closet had been altered to mock my size, but perhaps Olivia had inadvertently altered something more important. She'd awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long, a sense of my own worth that didn't depend on fitting into spaces others had designed for me. As dawn began to lighten the windows, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and revolutionary. I would wear a different dress to the gala, something that made me feel powerful rather than diminished. I would smile for the cameras and play my role as David's supportive wife. But I would also be gathering evidence, documenting everything I saw and heard, preparing for a reckoning that my family couldn't yet imagine. The woman they thought they could manipulate and diminish was about to remind them that intelligence and determination were more dangerous than beauty and charm. Olivia had taken scissors to my dress, but I was about to take something far sharper to the lies that held their world together. The morning would bring new challenges and difficult conversations, but for the first time in months, I felt ready to face them. Not as a victim, but as someone who'd finally remembered her own strength. The alarm clock buzzed at 6:30, though I'd been awake for the better part of an hour, staring at the patterns the morning light made through our bedroom's plantation shutters. David was already up, the sound of the shower running in the master bathroom accompanied by his off-key humming of what sounded like a classical piece he'd heard at last month's charity auction. He always hummed when he was excited about business prospects. a habit I'd found endearing during our early dating years but now recognized as a warning sign of impending intensity. I padded downstairs in my robe to make coffee, needing the ritual of grinding beans and measuring water to center myself before the day ahead. The kitchen was pristine, as always, our housekeeper Maria having worked her usual magic the previous evening. Olivia's papers from the night before had been cleared away, though I noticed her laptop bag still sat on the counter near the breakfast bar. She'd probably stayed late planning social media coverage for the gala, coordinating with photographers and videographers to capture what she called authentic brand moments. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Rebecca Chen confirming our coffee meeting for 9 o'clock at a small cafe in Coconut Grove. She'd chosen a location far from Meridian's offices and the usual haunts of Miami's biotech community, which reinforced my growing suspicion that whatever she wanted to discuss required discretion. I texted back my confirmation and poured a second cup of coffee, trying to organize my thoughts before David came downstairs full of gala enthusiasm. The morning news played softly from the small television mounted beneath our kitchen cabinets, the anchor discussing quarterly earnings reports from various pharmaceutical companies. Meridian Wellness wasn't large enough yet to warrant coverage on national financial programs, but David had mentioned his goal of reaching that level of visibility within the next 2 years. His ambition had always been one of his most attractive qualities, the way he could envision possibilities that others missed, and then methodically work toward making them reality. What I hadn't anticipated was how that same drive would eventually make me feel like an obstacle to be managed rather than a partner to be valued. David appeared in the kitchen wearing his workout clothes, a moisture-wicking shirt and shorts that emphasized the physique he maintained through a combination of personal training sessions and what he called, quote, optimization supplementation. He'd developed his own protein powder blend specifically for executives, something about supporting cognitive function while maintaining muscle mass during high-stress periods. I'd never tried it, partly because he'd never offered, and partly because I'd become wary of consuming products whose formulations I hadn't personally reviewed. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my forehead, in the perfunctory way that had replaced our previous morning conversations. "Big day ahead. I'm meeting with the board at 7:30 to finalize the launch presentation, then I've got back-to-back interviews with Forbes and Healthcare Weekly until noon." Olivia's arranged for the documentary crew to capture some behind-the-scenes footage of the preparation process. I noticed he didn't ask about my plans for the day, though that had become typical. My schedule was apparently assumed to revolve around his needs and the company's priorities. I sipped my coffee and made non-committal sounds of encouragement while mentally rehearsing how I would approach Rebecca about whatever data inconsistencies had prompted her urgent email. After David left for his morning run, I went upstairs to choose an outfit for my meeting with Rebecca. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was putting more thought into coffee shop attire than I currently had options for evening formal wear. The altered dress still hung in my closet, like evidence of a crime I wasn't sure how to report. I'd spent part of the previous evening researching emergency alterations, but every tailor I'd contacted was either booked solid or quoted timeframes that wouldn't work for same-day service. I settled on dark jeans and a cream silk blouse, professional enough for a business discussion, but casual enough not to attract attention in a public cafe. As I was applying minimal makeup, I heard voices from downstairs. Olivia must have arrived early to coordinate final details with David before his board meeting. Their conversation carried up through the house's open architecture, a mix of logistics and what sounded like shared excitement about media opportunities. The drive to Coconut Grove took 25 minutes through morning traffic that moved with typical Miami sluggishness. I'd chosen to take my own car rather than one of David's company vehicles, another small step toward maintaining independence that felt more significant than it should have. The cafe Rebecca had selected was tucked into a shopping plaza between a vintage bookstore and a yoga studio, the kind of place that attracted freelancers and artists rather than corporate executives. Rebecca was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, her laptop open and papers spread around her in organized chaos. She'd been with Meridian for 3 years, hired directly after completing her postdoctoral research at Johns Hopkins, and I'd always respected her methodical approach to data analysis. She looked up when I approached, her expression serious enough to confirm my suspicions that this meeting involved more than routine statistical questions. "Maya, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her. I ordered a latte, and waited while she gathered her thoughts, clearly weighing how much to reveal and how quickly. The cafe's background noise provided natural cover for our conversation, though I noticed Rebecca kept her voice low anyway. "I need to show you something," she began, turning her laptop screen toward me. "These are the raw data files from the Metabolic Revolution clinical trials. The ones David's been using to support the FDA approval process. I've been conducting the final statistical analysis for the submission package, and I found discrepancies that I can't explain through normal data variation." The spreadsheet displayed on her screen contained hundreds of rows of participant information, measurements taken at various points throughout the 12-week trial period. Rebecca highlighted specific columns that tracked weight loss, metabolic rate changes, and what the study protocol called subjective wellness indicators. At first glance, the numbers looked impressive, exactly the kind of results that would support David's claims about revolutionary metabolic enhancement. But as Rebecca walked me through her analysis, patterns emerged that made my stomach clench with recognition. The data points were too clean, too consistently positive, with statistical distributions that suggested manipulation rather than authentic biological variation. Participants who should have shown typical response curves instead demonstrated results that aligned perfectly with predetermined outcome targets. "Look at this subset," Rebecca said, pointing to a group of 30 participants who'd allegedly experienced dramatic weight loss. Their metabolic measurements showed changes that would be physiologically impossible without surgical intervention or severe caloric restriction. But according to their food diaries and activity logs, they maintained normal eating patterns throughout the study period. I studied the numbers with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years analyzing similar data sets. The anomalies Rebecca had identified weren't subtle irregularities that could be attributed to measurement error or individual variation. They were systematic alterations that suggested someone had retroactively modified the results to support predetermined conclusions. The scientific fraud was sophisticated enough to fool casual review but obvious to anyone with advanced statistical training. "Have you discussed this with David?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Rebecca shook her head, her expression troubled. "I wanted to confirm my analysis with someone I trusted before raising concerns through official channels. Maya, if these results were falsified, it's not just about FDA approval. We're talking about criminal fraud, conspiracy, potentially destroying people's health with products that don't work as advertised." The coffee shop's cheerful atmosphere felt surreal as we discussed the implications of what Rebecca had discovered. Customers around us chatted about weekend plans and work gossip, while we examined evidence that could destroy careers and possibly result in federal prosecution. I asked Rebecca to email me copies of her analysis, using my new anonymous account rather than my Meridian corporate email. If David was involved in falsifying data, I couldn't risk him accessing communications that might compromise Rebecca's safety or my ability to gather additional evidence. After Rebecca left, I sat alone at the table for another hour, ostensibly reading emails on my phone but actually processing the magnitude of what I'd learned. The fake social media testimonials Olivia had created were apparently just the tip of a much larger deception. If the core clinical data supporting Meridian's products had been fabricated, then every marketing claim, every investor presentation, every FDA submission was built on fraudulent foundations. My phone buzzed with a text from David, asking about my lunch plans. The annual gala preparation was apparently running ahead of schedule, and he wondered if I'd like to join him and Olivia for a celebratory meal at his favorite restaurant in Brickell. The casual tone of his message felt jarringly normal given what I'd just discovered, as if he existed in a parallel reality where scientific fraud was just another business strategy. I declined the lunch invitation, claiming errands I needed to complete before the evening's event. Instead, I drove to a different part of the city and found a public library where I could conduct research without leaving digital footprints connected to my personal devices. The anonymity of using public computers felt necessary as I began investigating Meridian's regulatory history and David's background in more detail than I'd ever considered appropriate during our marriage. What I found over the next 3 hours painted a picture that made me question everything I thought I knew about my husband's business practices. Meridian Wellness had been David's third attempt at building a supplement company, with 2 previous ventures ending in quiet dissolutions after regulatory scrutiny. His academic credentials, which I'd never thought to verify independently, included degrees from institutions that had been sanctioned for academic misconduct during the years he'd allegedly attended. More disturbing were the patterns I found in Meridian's employee turnover. Scientists and researchers were hired with great fanfare, worked for periods of 6 to 18 months, then left the company under circumstances that were described vaguely in press releases as pursuing other opportunities. When I cross-referenced their departure dates with Meridian's product development timeline, a clear pattern emerged. Researchers left the company shortly after completing work that became the basis for major product launches, almost as if their expertise was being extracted and then discarded to eliminate witnesses to questionable practices. I also discovered that my own research contributions to Meridian had been systematically reattributed to other team members in patent applications and scientific publications. Work I'd completed on metabolic pathway optimization had been credited to researchers who'd joined the company months after I'd submitted my findings. The intellectual property theft was methodical and thorough, designed to erase my scientific contributions while preserving the commercial value of my discoveries. By the time I left the library, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting Miami's skyline in shades of gold and orange that would have seemed beautiful under different circumstances. Instead, the approaching evening felt ominous, like walking toward a performance where I was expected to play a role in celebrating achievements built on lies and theft. I stopped at a department store on my way home and found a simple black dress that fit properly and felt appropriate for the occasion. It wasn't as elegant as the emerald silk Olivia had destroyed, but it was dignified and professional, qualities that seemed more important now than making a fashion statement. The saleswoman commented approvingly on how the dress complemented my figure, a small kindness that felt like armor against the evening ahead. When I arrived home, David's car was in the driveway alongside two vehicles I didn't recognize. I could hear voices from the backyard, where David often entertained business associates around our pool during important negotiations. Through the kitchen windows, I could see him gesturing animatedly while Olivia took notes on her ever-present laptop. The documentary crew Rebecca had mentioned was apparently already capturing footage, their professional cameras focused on what would undoubtedly be presented as spontaneous moments of entrepreneurial inspiration. I went upstairs to prepare for the gala, taking longer than usual with my hair and makeup in an effort to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. The woman looking back at me from the bathroom mirror appeared calm and composed, giving no indication of the turmoil churning beneath the surface. I'd learned to hide emotional distress during my childhood in a family that valued appearances over authenticity, skills that were apparently still useful in circumstances I'd never anticipated needing them. David knocked on the bedroom door as I was putting on earrings, entering with the energetic enthusiasm that characterized his mood before major business events. "Maya, you look beautiful," he said, though I noticed his attention was already shifting to his phone screen. "The advanced media coverage is exceeding our projections. Olivia's social media strategy is driving engagement rates that are off the charts." I wondered if those engagement rates were as artificially inflated as everything else associated with Meridian's marketing efforts, but I simply smiled and thanked him for the compliment. We rode to the hotel in his Tesla, David providing a running commentary on the guest list and media coverage, while I stared out the window at the passing cityscape. Miami's architecture blurred past in a mixture of Art Deco charm and modern glass towers, a city that understood the value of beautiful facades hiding complex realities. The Fontainebleau was ablaze with lights when we arrived, valets directing a steady stream of luxury vehicles toward the entrance. David had spared no expense in making the gala a showcase of success and sophistication, from the elaborate floral arrangements to the champagne reception that greeted guests in the hotel's opulent lobby. I recognized faces from Miami's business and social circles, investors and executives and media personalities who moved through the gathering with practiced ease. Olivia appeared almost immediately, stunning in a silver gown that caught the light with every movement. She air-kissed my cheeks and complimented my dress with apparent sincerity, though I detected something calculating in her smile. "Maya, you look wonderful," she said. "Very classic and understated. Perfect for tonight's theme." I hadn't realized there was a theme beyond celebrating Meridian's achievements, but Olivia quickly explained that the evening's narrative would focus on transformation and empowerment. with David's company positioned as a catalyst for positive change in people's lives. She'd coordinated the visual elements to reinforce that message, from the color scheme to the presentation graphics to the testimonial videos that would be featured during the awards ceremony. Those testimonial videos, I realized with growing certainty, probably featured the same fabricated success stories I'd discovered in Olivia's social media posts. The gala wasn't just a celebration. It was a massive propaganda operation designed to legitimize fraudulent products through emotional manipulation and sophisticated presentation. Every element had been carefully crafted to convince attendees that Meridian's supplements could deliver miraculous results without requiring the difficult work that authentic transformation actually demanded. The cocktail hour proceeded with typical networking intensity, conversations flowing around business opportunities and market trends, while servers circulated with appetizers and premium beverages. I found myself studying the gathering with new eyes, recognizing how many of the attendees were potential investors whose money would be obtained through deception. These weren't villains or fools. They were successful professionals who trusted that the scientific claims being presented to them were based on legitimate research rather than fabricated data. David moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed his own marketing materials, accepting congratulations and discussing expansion plans with enthusiasm that seemed genuinely felt. Either he was an exceptional actor, or he'd managed to convince himself that his fraudulent practices were justified by their commercial success. The possibility that he genuinely didn't understand the ethical implications of what he'd built was almost more disturbing than intentional deception. As the evening progressed toward the formal dinner and awards presentation, I found myself standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. I could continue playing the role of supportive wife, smiling for cameras and applauding achievements I knew were built on lies. I could preserve my marriage and my lifestyle by becoming complicit in a fraud that was destroying people's health and financial security. Or I could honor the scientific training that had shaped my worldview and the moral principles that had guided my decisions before I'd learned to compromise them for the sake of social acceptance. The choice felt both impossible and inevitable, like standing at the edge of a cliff where jumping was terrifying but staying meant accepting a slow death of the soul. The lights dimmed as guests moved toward the ballroom for dinner, and I realized that whatever decision I made tonight would echo through every day that followed. Olivia had destroyed my dress to mock my weight, but she'd inadvertently given me something far more valuable. She'd shown me exactly who my family had become, and in doing so, she'd reminded me who I refused to be. The ballroom at the Fontainebleau had been transformed into something that resembled a high-end medical conference crossed with a Hollywood awards show. Circular tables draped in crisp white linen surrounded a stage where massive screens displayed rotating images of Meridian's product line, each supplement bottle photographed with the kind of lighting typically reserved for luxury jewelry advertisements. The color scheme was predominantly silver and blue, what Olivia had described to the design team as trustworthy yet aspirational, though now I recognized it as psychological manipulation disguised as aesthetic choice. I found myself seated at table 3, positioned strategically between David's investment banker and the chief medical officer of a major hospital system that had recently begun recommending Meridian products to patients. The placement was deliberate, ensuring I'd be available for conversations that reinforced my role as the supportive spouse of a visionary entrepreneur. My dinner companions made polite conversation about Miami's restaurant scene and upcoming charity events, while I smiled and nodded, my attention focused on the production crew that moved through the ballroom with professional efficiency. The documentary cameras were capturing everything with the kind of coverage typically reserved for major political events or celebrity galas. Multiple angles, wireless microphones, and lighting equipment that had been integrated so seamlessly into the venue's design that most guests probably didn't realize the extent to which their conversations were being recorded. Olivia moved through the crowd with a headset and clipboard, coordinating shots and ensuring that key moments would be captured for what David had described as a, quote, behind-the-scenes look at transformative business leadership. During the appetizer course, I excused myself to visit the ladies' room, partly from genuine need, and partly to escape the suffocating atmosphere of orchestrated celebration. The restroom was elegant and spacious, with individual stalls that provided privacy for the kind of conversations that often happened in such spaces during corporate events. I was washing my hands when I overheard two women discussing Meridian's products with the kind of detailed knowledge that suggested professional familiarity. The clinical trial results are impressive, one of them was saying, but I'm concerned about the long-term sustainability of those weight loss numbers. In my practice, I've seen too many patients regain weight after discontinuing supplements, especially when the initial results seem too dramatic to be maintained through lifestyle changes alone. Her companion's response made my blood run cold. That's why the subscription model is so brilliant. Patients become dependent on continued supplementation to maintain their results, which creates recurring revenue streams while appearing to provide ongoing medical support. It's pharmaceutical business strategy applied to the nutraceutical market. I remained in the bathroom longer than necessary, pretending to touch up my makeup while processing what I'd overheard. These weren't random guests discussing Meridian's products. They were medical professionals who understood exactly how David's business model was designed to create dependency rather than sustainable health improvements. The conversation confirmed that the fraud extended beyond falsified data into the fundamental structure of how the products were marketed and prescribed. When I returned to the table, the main course was being served, an elaborate presentation of locally sourced fish that probably cost more per plate than many people spent on groceries in a week. David was deep in conversation with a venture capitalist from New York, discussing expansion opportunities that would require additional funding rounds and strategic partnerships. The numbers being mentioned were staggering, investments that would be secured based on the fraudulent research Rebecca had discovered. Olivia appeared beside my chair as dessert was being cleared, leaning down to whisper that the awards presentation would begin in 15 minutes, and asking if I needed anything before the ceremony started. Her solicitousness felt performative, as if she were playing the role of concerned sister-in-law for the benefit of anyone who might be watching. I thanked her politely and wondered how long she'd been aware of the systematic deception that surrounded Meridian's operations. The lights dimmed, and David took the stage to applause that felt both genuine and obligatory, the kind of response that successful business leaders receive when their audience consists primarily of people who benefit from maintaining positive relationships. He looked comfortable under the spotlights, confident in a way that suggested he'd either compartmentalized the ethical implications of his business practices or genuinely believed his own marketing materials. His speech began with personal anecdotes about the challenges of building a company in the competitive supplement industry, obstacles overcome through determination and innovative thinking. He spoke about the importance of scientific rigor in product development, the extensive research that had gone into formulating Meridian's breakthrough supplements, and the rigorous testing that ensured customer safety and efficacy. Every statement was technically accurate while being fundamentally misleading. A masterclass in corporate doublespeak that managed to sound transparent while revealing nothing of substance. Then came the testimonial videos, projected on screens large enough to ensure emotional impact. The first featured a woman named Jennifer from Tampa, who described losing 60 pounds in 4 months after beginning Meridian's metabolic enhancement program. Her transformation was visually dramatic, supported by before and after photographs that showed a remarkable physical change. She spoke tearfully about regaining confidence and improving her health, crediting David's products with saving her life. I recognized Jennifer immediately as one of the fabricated testimonials I'd discovered in Olivia's social media posts. The before photographs were authentic, showing a woman who had genuinely struggled with weight issues. But the after images were stock photography, professional headshots that bore no resemblance to Jennifer's actual appearance. The testimonial itself was probably scripted, performed by an actress who specialized in corporate video production. 3 more testimonials followed, each featuring dramatic transformations that violated basic principles of human physiology. The weight loss numbers were too dramatic, the timelines too compressed, the health improvements too comprehensive to be achievable through supplementation alone. Yet the audience responded with enthusiasm, applauding each story as evidence of Meridian's revolutionary impact on people's lives. David concluded his presentation by announcing Meridian's expansion into international markets, partnerships with major retail chains, and research initiatives that would develop even more advanced metabolic enhancement technologies. The applause was thunderous, a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes while cameras captured every angle of the celebration. Olivia beamed from her position near the stage, clearly proud of the event's success and her role in orchestrating such an impressive production. As the formal program ended and guests began moving toward the reception area for continued networking, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers who wanted to congratulate me on David's achievements. Their comments were kind and well-intentioned, praising his vision and expressing admiration for the scientific breakthroughs he'd accomplished. I accepted their congratulations with appropriate gracelessness, while feeling increasingly like a fraud myself, complicit in deceptions that could cause genuine harm to vulnerable people. The reception continued for another hour, with conversations that ranged from business opportunities to vacation plans, the kind of social mixing that characterized successful corporate events. I moved through the gathering with practiced ease, making appropriate responses to questions about Meridian's future plans and my own role in supporting David's work. The performance was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with physical fatigue and everything to do with the emotional cost of sustained deception. I was standing near the bar, nursing a glass of wine I had no intention of finishing, when I overheard a conversation that made everything crystallize with painful clarity. Two investors were discussing Meridian's valuation and the potential for an initial public offering that could generate enormous returns for early stakeholders. They spoke with the casual confidence of people who believed they were participating in a legitimate business opportunity rather than an elaborate fraud scheme. The FDA approval is essentially guaranteed, one of them was saying. The clinical trial data is so compelling that regulators would have difficulty justifying rejection. Once we have federal endorsement, the market penetration opportunities are unlimited. We're looking at a billion-dollar company within 3 years. His companion nodded enthusiastically. David's assembled an impressive team of researchers and marketing professionals. The social media engagement numbers are particularly strong, suggesting significant consumer demand for these products. The demographic targeting has been exceptionally sophisticated. I realized they were talking about Olivia's fabricated testimonials and David's falsified research as if they represented genuine business accomplishments. These investors were about to commit substantial financial resources based on systematic deception, and their money would be used to expand operations that could cause widespread harm to public health. The scope of the fraud was breathtaking in its ambition and terrifying in its potential consequences. My phone vibrated with a text message, and I stepped away from the crowd to check it discreetly. The message was from Rebecca Chen, sent to my anonymous email account and forwarded automatically to my phone. She'd continued analyzing Meridian's research data and discovered additional evidence of systematic falsification across multiple studies. The message was brief but urgent, requesting an emergency meeting to discuss what she'd described as criminal-level fraud with public safety implications. I looked across the ballroom at David, still surrounded by admirers and potential investors, accepting congratulations and discussing future opportunities with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed in his mission. Either he was a sociopathic manipulator who felt no guilt about the harm his products might cause, or he'd managed to rationalize his behavior to the point where he no longer recognized it as fraudulent. Neither possibility offered much comfort. Olivia was nearby, coordinating final shots with the documentary crew, while simultaneously managing social media updates that would extend the evening's impact into digital channels. She moved with the efficiency of someone who understood exactly how modern marketing worked, how to create narratives that would resonate with target audiences and drive purchasing decisions. Her skills were impressive and would have been admirable if applied to legitimate products rather than fraudulent schemes. The realization that both David and Olivia were probably beyond redemption hit me with unexpected force. I'd been hoping to find evidence that they were unwitting participants in something that had spiraled beyond their control, victims of circumstances rather than architects of deception. But the sophistication of their operations, the systematic nature of their fraud, and the calculated cruelty of Olivia's personal attacks suggested a level of intentionality that couldn't be explained by poor judgment or ethical blindness. I excused myself from the reception and found a quiet corridor where I could make a phone call without being overheard. I dialed Rebecca's number, and she answered immediately despite the late hour. "Maya, thank God you called. I've been going through more of the research files, and what I've found is worse than I initially thought. We're not just talking about falsified data. We're talking about products that could cause serious medical complications for people with certain health conditions. Rebecca's voice was tight with stress and professional concern. She discovered that Meridian's supplements contained undisclosed pharmaceutical compounds that could interact dangerously with common medications. The metabolic enhancement effects that David claimed were achieved through natural ingredients actually resulted from synthetic stimulants that had been banned in other countries due to cardiac side effects. People were unknowingly consuming substances that could cause heart palpitations, elevated blood pressure, and potentially fatal interactions with prescription drugs. The public health implications were staggering. Thousands of people had purchased Meridian products based on claims of natural, safe weight loss support. Instead, they were consuming pharmaceutical compounds that could cause serious medical emergencies, particularly for individuals with pre-existing cardiovascular conditions. The liability exposure was enormous, but more importantly, people's lives were at risk. "I have copies of everything," Rebecca continued. Chemical analysis reports, internal memos discussing potential side effects, correspondence with overseas manufacturers who supply the undisclosed ingredients. "Maya, we have to report this to the FDA immediately. Every day we wait increases the risk of someone being seriously injured or killed by these products." Standing in that hotel corridor, surrounded by the distant sounds of celebration and networking, I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I couldn't be complicit in fraud that endangered public health, regardless of the personal consequences. My marriage, my lifestyle, my social standing, my financial security, none of it mattered compared to preventing potential harm to innocent people who trusted that the products they were consuming had been tested for safety. I asked Rebecca to compile all of her evidence into a comprehensive report that could be submitted to federal regulators and law enforcement agencies. I also requested copies of everything she'd discovered, using my anonymous email account to ensure that David couldn't access or delete the communications. We agreed to meet the following morning to coordinate our reporting strategy and ensure that multiple copies of the evidence would be preserved in secure locations. After ending the call, I remained in the corridor for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what I was about to do. Reporting David and Olivia would destroy their careers and potentially result in criminal prosecution. It would also destroy my marriage and eliminate any possibility of reconciliation with my sister. I would become a whistleblower, a role that often resulted in professional isolation and personal ostracism, even when the revelations served the public interest. But the alternative was accepting responsibility for harm that could be prevented through action. I thought about the people who had purchased Meridian products believing they were making healthy choices, people who might be experiencing cardiac symptoms without understanding the connection to supplements they'd been told were natural and safe. I thought about the investors who were about to commit resources to expanding operations that put more people at risk. I thought about the medical professionals who were recommending products based on falsified research. When I returned to the reception, the crowd was beginning to thin as guests departed for other evening plans or headed home after a successful networking event. David was near the entrance, shaking hands and exchanging business cards with people who would wake up tomorrow morning planning to invest in or promote a company built on systematic fraud. He spotted me across the room and waved, his expression radiating satisfaction with the evening's accomplishments. Olivia was packing up her equipment and coordinating final social media posts that would maintain engagement momentum overnight. She'd changed from her silver gown into more practical clothes, though she still looked elegant and composed, despite the long evening of event management. Her organizational skills and marketing intuition were genuinely impressive, qualities that could have built legitimate success if applied to authentic products. I walked over to David, who immediately wrapped his arm around my waist and pulled me close for a photograph with several lingering guests. The camera flash captured what would probably be the last image of us together as a married couple, though neither of us knew it at the time. I smiled for the photograph while mentally preparing for conversations that would begin the process of dismantling everything he'd built. The drive home was quiet. David focused on responding to text messages and emails from potential investors who wanted to schedule follow-up meetings. He was already planning the next phase of Meridian's expansion, oblivious to the fact that his company would soon be the subject of federal investigation. His confidence was both admirable and tragic, the optimism of someone who'd convinced himself that success justified any methods used to achieve it. At home, I went through the motions of my usual evening routine, while David continued working in his study, energized by the gala's success and eager to capitalize on the momentum. I could hear him on conference calls with international partners, discussing manufacturing capacity and distribution networks that would bring Meridian products to global markets. Each conversation represented additional potential harm that could be prevented if regulatory agencies acted quickly on the evidence Rebecca and I would provide. I lay awake most of that night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the irreversible nature of the decision I'd made. By morning, I would begin the process of destroying my family's criminal enterprise, knowing that the destruction would extend to my own life as well. It was the right choice, the only choice that aligned with my values and professional ethics. But that didn't make it easy. As dawn approached, I finally fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional weight of carrying secrets that would soon become public knowledge. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and permanent consequences. But it would also bring the relief of finally acting on convictions I'd suppressed for too long. The woman who had been diminished and dismissed was about to remind everyone that intelligence and integrity were more powerful than charm and deception. The morning sun streamed through our bedroom windows with the kind of brilliant intensity that made Miami famous. But I felt cold despite the warmth beginning to build outside. David was already in the shower, singing something that sounded like victory music, his voice echoing off the marble tiles with the confidence of someone who believed the previous evening had secured his empire's future. I could hear him planning his day through the bathroom door, scheduling meetings with investors, and strategizing media follow-up to maximize the gala's impact. I dressed quietly in dark slacks and a white button-down shirt, professional attire that felt like armor for the battles ahead. My hands were steady as I applied makeup and pulled my hair back into a neat ponytail, though my reflection showed someone who looked like she was preparing for war rather than a typical Wednesday morning. The woman staring back at me from the mirror had made peace with the destruction she was about to unleash, accepting that some forms of justice required personal sacrifice. Downstairs, I found Olivia in the kitchen, laptop open and phone pressed to her ear, coordinating what sounded like a media blitz designed to capitalize on the previous night's success. She was scheduling interviews for David with business publications and industry podcasts, building momentum that would attract additional investors and expand Meridian's market reach. Her efficiency was remarkable, each conversation moving seamlessly into the next, as she orchestrated a campaign that would have been admirable if it weren't promoting fraudulent products. She looked up when I entered, covering her phone's microphone to whisper excitedly about the engagement metrics from the gala's social media coverage. "Maya, the numbers are incredible. We're trending across multiple platforms, and the documentary footage is already generating buzz among industry influencers. David's vision is really resonating with people who understand transformative business leadership." I poured coffee and made non-committal sounds of encouragement while mentally cataloging every detail that might become relevant to federal investigators. Olivia's enthusiasm felt particularly cruel given what I now knew about the systematic nature of her deceptions, the calculated ways she'd built fraudulent testimonials and managed digital campaigns that manipulated vulnerable people into purchasing dangerous products. David appeared in the kitchen wearing one of his expensive suits, the kind of tailored perfection that projected success and reliability. He kissed my forehead absently while scanning messages on his phone, already mentally engaged with the business opportunities that would dominate his day. His confidence was absolute, the certainty of someone who'd never seriously considered that his actions might have consequences beyond market fluctuations and competitor responses. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to destroy the life of a man who trusted me completely, who had no idea that his wife was planning to expose crimes that could result in federal prison sentences. David's faith in my loyalty was touching in its naivety, though it also demonstrated how thoroughly he'd underestimated both my intelligence and my moral convictions. He saw me as an accessory to his success rather than an independent agent capable of making decisions that could threaten his empire. I excused myself from the kitchen, claiming errands that needed completion, and drove to my meeting with Rebecca at a different location than the previous day. We'd agreed to gather at a small business center in Coral Gables, renting a conference room where we could review documents and coordinate our reporting strategy without risking discovery by anyone connected to Meridian. The paranoia felt justified, given the financial stakes involved and the sophisticated nature of the fraud we were preparing to expose. Rebecca arrived carrying 2 large folders and a laptop bag, her expression grim with the weight of what she'd discovered during her continued investigation. "Maya, it's worse than we thought," she said before we'd even sat down. "I found evidence that David has been systematically stealing research from other scientists, not just falsifying his own data. The metabolic pathway research that forms the basis for Meridian's core products was plagiarized from multiple academic sources, with the original author's work repackaged and presented as proprietary innovation." She spread documents across the conference table, academic papers and patent applications that showed clear patterns of intellectual theft. David had attended conferences where cutting-edge research was presented, then incorporated those findings into Meridian's product development without attribution or compensation to the original researchers. The plagiarism was sophisticated, with enough modifications to avoid obvious detection while preserving the essential scientific insights that made the research valuable. But the theft extended beyond academic work into industrial espionage that bordered on corporate sabotage. Rebecca had discovered that David had hired researchers specifically to gain access to proprietary information from competing companies, then used that intelligence to develop products that undermined his competitors' market positions. The practice was systematic and ongoing, suggesting a business model built fundamentally on stealing other people's innovations rather than developing original solutions. The chemical analysis reports were particularly damning, showing that Meridian's supplements contained pharmaceutical compounds that had been banned in European markets due to safety concerns. The stimulants David claimed were natural metabolism boosters were actually synthetic drugs that could cause cardiac arrhythmias, especially in people with underlying heart conditions. The liability exposure was enormous, but the human cost was potentially catastrophic. Rebecca had also identified a pattern of selective reporting in Meridian's clinical trials, with negative results systematically excluded from data submissions to regulatory agencies. Participants who experienced adverse reactions were removed from studies without their negative outcomes being reflected in final reports. The practice created an artificially positive safety profile that masked genuine health risks associated with the products. As we reviewed the evidence, my phone began buzzing with increasingly urgent messages from David and Olivia. They were apparently expecting my participation in media interviews and investor meetings that had been scheduled to capitalize on the gala's success. David's texts grew more insistent as the morning progressed, his tone shifting from casual inquiry to pointed questions about my whereabouts and availability. I ignored the messages while Rebecca and I finalized our reporting strategy. We would submit evidence simultaneously to the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, ensuring that multiple agencies would investigate different aspects of Meridian's fraudulent operations. Rebecca would also contact the university research departments whose work had been plagiarized, providing them with evidence they could use to pursue their own legal remedies. The comprehensive nature of our documentation was crucial for ensuring that David and Olivia couldn't dismiss the allegations as disgruntled employee complaints or competitive sabotage. We had chemical analysis reports, internal communications, financial records, and testimony from multiple sources, creating an evidentiary foundation that would be difficult to discredit or suppress. The truth was supported by scientific rigor that David had abandoned in pursuit of commercial success. By noon, we'd completed the initial regulatory submissions and secured copies of all evidence in multiple locations, including cloud storage accounts that couldn't be accessed or deleted by Meridian's management. The irreversible nature of what we'd done felt both terrifying and liberating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering the ability to fly. My marriage was effectively over. My lifestyle was about to disappear, and my family relationships were permanently destroyed, but I felt more authentic than I had in years. Rebecca drove back to Meridian's offices to maintain the appearance of normal work routines, while federal agencies began their preliminary investigations. I went home to collect personal belongings and prepare for conversations that would be among the most difficult of my life. The house felt different when I walked through the front door, like a stage set that would soon be struck and stored away, all its careful arrangements revealed as temporary illusions. David was in his study, engaged in what sounded like an enthusiastic discussion with potential international distributors. His voice carried the excitement of someone who believed he was building something revolutionary, solving problems that had challenged the supplement industry for decades. The tragic irony was that his genuine enthusiasm for innovation had been corrupted by shortcuts and deceptions that undermined everything he claimed to represent. I packed a suitcase with essential items, knowing that I would probably not be returning to the house once David learned about my role in exposing his crimes. The belongings I selected felt symbolic of the life I was choosing to rebuild: books and photographs and professional documents that represented my authentic interests, rather than the identity I'd constructed as David's wife. Each item went into the suitcase like a vote for independence over comfort, truth over security. Olivia found me in the bedroom as I was finishing my packing, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she processed what she was seeing. "Maya, what's going on? Are you and David having problems?" Her voice carried what sounded like genuine worry, though I wondered how much of her concern was personal versus professional, motivated by friendship or by fear that marital discord might interfere with Meridian's business operations. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had been my sister and my tormentor, someone who'd shared my childhood and then systematically undermined my adult achievements. The cruelty of altering my dress had been petty compared to her role in promoting products that could seriously harm people's health, but it had served as a catalyst for recognizing the broader patterns of deception that characterized her relationship with truth. "We need to talk," I said simply. "But not here, and not with David around. There are things you need to know about what I've discovered, and decisions you need to make about how you want to handle what's coming next." Her expression grew wary, the instinctive caution of someone who'd spent years managing information and controlling narratives to protect her interests. We agreed to meet at a restaurant in downtown Miami, neutral territory where we could speak candidly, without the risk of David overhearing conversations that might prompt him to take defensive actions. I suggested she bring her laptop and any personal files she might want to secure, though I didn't explain why such precautions might become necessary. The hint was subtle enough to avoid panic, but clear enough to convey urgency. The drive downtown gave me time to rehearse how I would explain to Olivia the magnitude of what she'd become involved in, though I suspected she understood more about Meridian's questionable practices than she'd ever admitted. Her social media campaigns had been too sophisticated, too systematically deceptive, to have been created by someone who genuinely believed the testimonials were authentic. She was either complicit in fraud or willfully ignorant to a degree that bordered on criminal negligence. The restaurant was nearly empty during the afternoon lull between lunch and dinner service, providing privacy for conversations that required discretion. Olivia arrived 10 minutes after me, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of anxiety that suggested she was beginning to understand that our meeting involved more than family drama or marital counseling. She sat across from me in the booth I'd selected, her laptop bag and purse positioned like barriers against whatever news I was about to deliver. I didn't ease into the revelation gradually or attempt to soften the impact through careful phrasing. "Olivia, David's company is built on systematic fraud, and your marketing campaigns have been promoting products that could seriously harm people's health. The clinical trial data has been falsified, the testimonials you've been using are fabricated, and the supplements contain pharmaceutical compounds that can cause cardiac complications." Her reaction was immediate and revealing. She didn't express shock or disbelief or ask for clarification about my accusations. Instead, her face went pale and her hands gripped the edge of the table like someone who'd been caught rather than someone who'd been informed. "Maya, you don't understand the competitive pressures in this industry. Everyone exaggerates their results to some degree. David is just better at it than most companies." The response confirmed what I'd suspected about her level of awareness regarding Meridian's fraudulent practices. She knew the testimonials were fake, knew the clinical claims were exaggerated, knew that the marketing campaigns she'd designed were systematically deceiving consumers. Her defense wasn't based on ignorance but on rationalization, the belief that widespread deception justified her own participation in fraud. I showed her copies of Rebecca's chemical analysis reports, the evidence of undisclosed pharmaceutical compounds that could interact dangerously with common medications. I explained the cardiac risks associated with the synthetic stimulants David was marketing as natural metabolism boosters. I described the systematic plagiarism of academic research and the selective reporting of clinical trial results that had created artificially positive safety profiles for dangerous products. With each revelation, Olivia's defensive posture became more pronounced. She argued that supplement regulation was inherently flawed, that traditional pharmaceutical companies used similar marketing strategies, that consumers bore responsibility for researching products before purchasing them. Her justifications were sophisticated and well-rehearsed, suggesting that she'd spent considerable time rationalizing her participation in activities she knew were ethically questionable. But when I explained that federal agencies were already investigating Meridian's operations, and that criminal charges were likely forthcoming, her composure finally cracked. "Maya, what have you done?" she whispered, her voice carrying the shock of someone who'd assumed her actions would never have serious consequences. "You've destroyed everything David has built, everything we've worked toward together." The accusation that I destroyed their achievements was particularly galling, given that those achievements were built on theft and deception. I hadn't destroyed anything legitimate. I'd exposed crimes that were already destroying people's health and financial security. The real destruction had been caused by David and Olivia themselves, through decisions to prioritize profit over public safety and marketing success over scientific integrity. I offered her an opportunity to cooperate with federal investigators, to provide evidence about the scope of Meridian's fraudulent operations in exchange for potentially reduced legal consequences. Whistleblower protections might apply if she could demonstrate that she'd been coerced into participating in activities she'd understood were illegal. The offer was genuine, motivated by residual familial loyalty despite the damage she'd caused to my personal and professional life. Her response was swift and venomous. "You're pathetic, Maya. You've always been jealous of people who could actually succeed in competitive environments. David built this company through vision and hard work, and you're trying to destroy it because you couldn't handle being married to someone more successful than yourself. The dress was just motivation, but apparently you needed more help than fashion advice could provide." The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculated precision, designed to wound me in exactly the way she knew would be most effective. But instead of the devastation she'd probably expected, I felt something closer to relief. Her response eliminated any lingering guilt I might have felt about the consequences my actions would have for her future. She'd chosen loyalty to fraud over accountability to truth, criminal complicity over ethical responsibility. I stood up from the table, leaving copies of the evidence for her review, though I doubted she would use the information to make better decisions about her legal situation. "Olivia, federal agents will probably want to interview you within the next few days. I'd recommend consulting with a criminal defense attorney before speaking with investigators. The charges you're potentially facing are serious enough to result in significant prison time." Her face was flushed with anger, and what I recognized as genuine fear, the first authentic emotion she displayed during our entire conversation. The carefully constructed image of confident success had crumbled, revealing someone who'd never seriously considered that her actions might have consequences beyond market metrics and social media engagement. The reality of criminal prosecution was apparently more terrifying than the prospect of causing harm to innocent consumers. I walked out of the restaurant knowing that I'd given her every reasonable opportunity to choose cooperation over continued deception. Her response had clarified the fundamental differences between us, the values that made reconciliation impossible regardless of shared history or family bonds. She'd chosen David's version of success over ethical responsibility, criminal conspiracy over moral accountability. The drive home felt like traveling toward an explosion I'd set in motion, inevitable destruction that would reshape every aspect of my life. David's cars were still in the driveway, along with several others I didn't recognize, suggesting that he was conducting business meetings that would soon be interrupted by federal investigators. The irony was almost overwhelming. He was probably negotiating deals and planning expansions for a company that would cease to exist within weeks. I parked at the end of the driveway and sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage for the confrontation that would end my marriage and complete the process of dismantling everything David had built. The house looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, its elegant architecture and manicured landscaping projecting the kind of success that David had worked so hard to achieve. Soon it would be seized as evidence in federal criminal proceedings, another casualty of decisions to prioritize appearances over authenticity. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca confirming that federal agents had begun preliminary interviews with Meridian employees and were planning to execute search warrants within 24 hours. The investigation was moving faster than we'd anticipated, driven by the severity of the public health risks associated with Meridian's products. David's empire was about to collapse with the kind of spectacular finality that would make headlines in business publications and serve as a cautionary tale about the consequences of systematic fraud. I took a deep breath, picked up my suitcase, and walked toward the front door, ready to have the most difficult conversation of my life with a man who'd never imagined that his trusted wife could be the instrument of his destruction. I found David in his study, surrounded by the familiar chaos of success. Legal documents covered his mahogany desk, investment proposals scattered across the leather sofa, and his laptop displayed what appeared to be a virtual meeting with potential European distributors. He was animated in the way that came naturally when discussing expansion opportunities, his hands gesturing enthusiastically as he described market penetration strategies and projected revenue streams. The scene would have been inspiring if it weren't built entirely on criminal foundations. He looked up when I entered, his expression shifting from business focus to mild irritation at the interruption. "Maya, I've been trying to reach you all day. We had the Sinclair Group conference call at 2, and you missed the interview with Wellness Weekly." His tone carried the patient exasperation of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, though I detected underlying anxiety about my unexplained absence during such a crucial period. I set my suitcase down just inside the doorway, the sound causing him to notice my luggage for the first time. His confusion was genuine, the puzzled expression of someone trying to process information that didn't align with his expectations or understanding of our relationship dynamics. "Maya, what's going on? Are you traveling somewhere for work? Did I miss something on the calendar? David, we need to talk. And you need to end that call." The firmness in my voice surprised us both, cutting through the polite deference that had characterized most of our conversations for years. He made apologetic noises to his virtual meeting participants, promising to reconnect later that evening, though I suspected those follow-up conversations would never happen. After closing his laptop, he turned to face me with an expression that mixed concern with the kind of impatience successful people display when their schedules are disrupted by unexpected personal issues. His body language suggested he was prepared for a brief discussion about whatever domestic problem required immediate attention, then a quick return to the business opportunities that demanded his focus. "I've reported Meridian Wellness to federal agencies for systematic fraud, including falsified clinical trial data, undisclosed pharmaceutical compounds in your supplements, and theft of intellectual property from academic researchers. The investigation has already begun, and you'll probably be contacted by federal agents within the next 24 hours. The silence that followed was profound, the kind of absolute quiet that occurs when someone's entire understanding of reality shifts in an instant. David stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language, his mind apparently struggling to process the words and their implications. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally something that resembled genuine fear. "Maya, what are you talking about?" he said finally, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying to de-escalate a situation they didn't understand. "Meridian operates within all regulatory guidelines. Our research meets industry standards, and our products have helped thousands of people achieve their health goals. If you're concerned about specific practices, we can discuss modifications to address any issues you've identified." His response was exactly what I'd expected, the reflexive denial of someone who'd spent years rationalizing questionable decisions until they no longer recognized them as problematic. But the fear in his eyes suggested that underneath the public protests, he understood exactly what I was referring to, and why federal investigation posed an existential threat to everything he'd built. I pulled out copies of Rebecca's chemical analysis reports and spread them across his desk, covering the investment proposals and expansion plans with evidence of the crimes that would destroy his company. "David, these supplements contain pharmaceutical stimulants that have been banned in Europe due to cardiac risks. You've been marketing them as natural metabolism boosters, while hiding ingredients that can cause heart arrhythmias, especially in people with underlying health conditions." He picked up the reports with trembling hands, scanning the technical data that clearly identified synthetic compounds and products he'd claimed were derived from natural sources. His background in business rather than science meant he probably didn't understand all the chemical details, but the implications were obvious enough that even a layperson could recognize the magnitude of the deception. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "And why would you take this to federal agencies without discussing it with me first?" "We're married, Maya. We're supposed to be partners. If there are problems with our formulations, we can address them internally and make necessary corrections. The assumption that I would prioritize our marriage over public safety was both touching and infuriating, evidence of how thoroughly he'd misunderstood both my character and the severity of his actions. He seemed genuinely confused by the idea that I would place ethical obligations above personal loyalty, as if reporting crimes was a betrayal rather than a moral imperative. I explained about the fabricated testimonials in Olivia's social media campaigns, the systematic plagiarism of academic research, and the selective reporting that had hidden adverse reactions from regulatory submissions. With each revelation, David's composure deteriorated further, the confident entrepreneur replaced by someone who was beginning to understand the scope of the legal consequences he would face. His attempts at justification grew increasingly desperate. The supplement industry is highly competitive, Maya. Everyone uses aggressive marketing strategies to differentiate their products. The regulatory framework is designed for pharmaceutical companies, not nutraceutical innovation. We've been pushing boundaries to bring breakthrough products to market faster than traditional approval processes would allow. The rationalization was sophisticated but ultimately hollow, the kind of logic that corporate criminals used to convince themselves that systematic fraud was actually visionary business strategy. David had apparently convinced himself that breaking laws was justified by the commercial success that resulted, that public health concerns were secondary to market opportunities and revenue generation. But when I mentioned that Olivia was aware of the fraudulent nature of her marketing campaigns and had actively participated in creating fake testimonials, his defensive posture shifted to something that resembled genuine shock. He apparently hadn't realized the extent to which his sister-in-law was complicit in the deception, assuming that her marketing success resulted from skill rather than systematic dishonesty. Maya, Olivia told me those testimonials were based on real customer feedback. She said she was aggregating success stories from multiple sources to create representative examples of typical results. If she was fabricating testimonials entirely, that's something I would never have approved. His distress seemed authentic, though it revealed the compartmentalized thinking that had allowed him to build a criminal enterprise while maintaining his self-image as an ethical businessman. He'd delegated the most obviously fraudulent activities to others, creating plausible deniability that protected him from confronting the moral implications of his business model. I showed him screenshots of the stock photography Olivia had used to create fake before and after images, the systematic way she'd constructed fictional narratives around purchased headshots. His face went pale as he processed evidence that his marketing success was built entirely on manufactured deception, that the testimonials he'd been citing in investor presentations and media interviews were complete fabrications. David, people have been making decisions about their health and spending their money based on lies. Some of your customers probably have heart conditions that make your undisclosed stimulants dangerous, potentially life-threatening. The fraud isn't just about false advertising. It's about putting vulnerable people at serious medical risk. The human consequences seemed to hit him harder than the legal implications. Perhaps because he'd spent years focusing on abstract metrics, rather than the real people who purchased his products. His hands shook as he rifled through the evidence, finally confronting the gap between his marketing claims and the reality of what he'd been selling to unsuspecting consumers. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice hollow, with the recognition that his world was about to collapse in spectacular fashion. "When will the federal agents arrive? What kind of charges are we looking at? Can we negotiate some kind of settlement that allows Meridian to continue operating while we address the regulatory concerns?" The questions revealed how completely he'd misunderstood the situation's severity. This wasn't a regulatory compliance issue that could be resolved through fines and corrective action plans. This was systematic criminal fraud that had endangered public health, the kind of case that federal prosecutors used to send messages about corporate accountability and consumer protection. I explained that the investigation would probably result in criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and potentially manslaughter if anyone had died from cardiac complications related to his products. The company would be shut down, its assets seized, and its executives prosecuted to the full extent of federal law. There would be no negotiated settlements or opportunities to continue operations while addressing concerns. David aged visibly as the implications sank in, The confident executive replaced by someone who was beginning to understand that his life as he'd known it was over. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, the social status. Everything would disappear once the investigation became public knowledge and criminal charges were filed. Maya, I know I made mistakes, but I never intended to hurt anyone. The products work for most people, and the business has created jobs and economic value. If there are safety issues, we can reformulate everything and implement better quality control procedures. Please, there has to be a way to fix this without destroying everything we've built together. His plea was heartbreaking in its desperation, but it revealed the fundamental disconnect between his understanding of accountability and the reality of what he'd done. He saw the fraud as a series of poor decisions that could be corrected through better business practices, not as systematic criminal activity that had endangered countless lives for the sake of profit. I picked up my suitcase and moved toward the door, though I paused to deliver one final message. David, I've filed for divorce. The papers will be served tomorrow, probably around the same time federal agents execute search warrants for your offices and this house. You should contact a criminal defense attorney immediately, and you should tell them everything about how Meridian has been operating. His expression crumbled completely, the last vestiges of hope disappearing as he processed the totality of what was happening. His wife was leaving him, his company was being investigated for federal crimes, and his freedom was in jeopardy. The empire he'd built through fraud and deception was collapsing with the kind of spectacular finality that would make headlines and serve as a cautionary tale for years to come. I drove away from the house for the last time, watching it recede in my rearview mirror like a stage set being struck after the final performance. The elegant architecture and manicured landscaping that had once represented security and success now looked like evidence waiting to be cataloged by federal investigators. The hotel where I'd booked a room was modest but clean, the kind of place where I could disappear while legal proceedings unfolded and media attention focused on Meridian's spectacular collapse. The contrast with my previous lifestyle was stark, but the simplicity felt liberating rather than limiting. I was finally living according to my own values rather than adapting myself to someone else's version of success. 3 months later, I sat in a coffee shop in Seattle, reading news coverage of David and Olivia's sentencing hearing. The federal prosecution had been swift and comprehensive, with both of them pleading guilty to multiple charges rather than risking even longer prison terms through trial. David received 8 years for conspiracy and fraud, while Olivia got 5 years for her role in the marketing deception. Meridian Wellness had been dissolved, its assets liquidated to provide restitution for victims who'd been harmed by the fraudulent products. The article mentioned that the investigation had been prompted by evidence provided by an anonymous whistleblower with inside knowledge of the company's operations. My name wasn't mentioned, which suited me perfectly. I'd testified before grand juries and provided depositions for civil lawsuits, but I'd managed to avoid the media attention that often surrounded high-profile corporate fraud cases. Rebecca had found a position with a legitimate pharmaceutical company, her career enhanced rather than damaged by her role in exposing the fraud. The scientific community had rallied around researchers who demonstrated integrity under pressure, creating opportunities that rewarded ethical behavior rather than complicity in deception. Marcus found me there late one evening, reviewing user feedback from our first 100,000 customers. People were writing to thank us for creating technology that actually helped them manage stress and find peace, unaware that their positive experiences validated years of research and development that someone had once tried to claim as his own. Any regrets? Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside my desk. I thought about the question seriously, considering everything we'd lost and everything we'd gained through the legal battle that had consumed our lives for over a year. The family relationships that might never fully heal, the emotional toll of public litigation, the constant stress of fighting someone I'd once loved and trusted. No regrets, I said finally. Danny made his choice when he decided to steal my work. I made mine when I decided to fight back. The difference is that my choice was about protecting what I'd created, while his was about taking what someone else had built. Outside the office windows, Seattle's skyline glittered in the darkness, a city built on innovation, and the dreams of people willing to turn their ideas into reality. Somewhere in that same city, other inventors were probably working late into the night, perfecting technologies that might change the world. Thanks to our case, they now knew that their work was protected, that theft would face consequences, and that authentic innovation would ultimately triumph over stolen concepts. Danny had taught me that family bonds could be broken by greed and deception, but Marcus had shown me that some alliances grow stronger under pressure. The brother who'd betrayed my trust was serving time in federal prison, while the man who'd helped me fight back had become my husband and business partner in the technology company, built on properly credited innovations. In the end, Danny hadn't just stolen my intellectual property, he'd given me the opportunity to prove that authentic creators don't give up when faced with theft and betrayal. We fight back, we protect what we've built, and we make sure the world knows exactly who deserves credit for changing it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Each day brought progress toward understanding metabolic processes in ways that honored both scientific truth and human dignity. Sometimes former acquaintances from Miami would recognize my name in academic publications and reach out with questions about what had really happened with Meridian Wellness. I usually declined to discuss the details, preferring to let the legal record speak for itself. The story belonged to the victims who'd been harmed, the researchers whose work had been stolen, and the regulatory agencies that had worked to prevent future fraud. On the anniversary of the gala, where everything had unraveled, I published my first peer-reviewed paper on metabolic enhancement through legitimate therapeutic approaches. The research represented everything Meridian's products had pretended to be: scientifically rigorous, ethically sound, and genuinely helpful to people struggling with metabolic disorders. The woman who'd been dismissed as too substantial to succeed, too difficult to control, too principled to manipulate, had rebuilt herself into someone who couldn't be erased or diminished by anyone's cruel intentions. I'd learned that authentic success came from alignment between values and actions, not from adapting yourself to other people's definitions of worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.